Since we are members of Christ's body, Christ's life is offered to us and becomes our life. So we are enlivened, saved, and deified, yet we could not be deified if Christ did not make us members of his body. We could not be saved if the holy mysteries, meaning the sacraments of the church, did not exist. These make us one body with Christ. And as according to the church fathers, we share the same body and the same blood as Christ. We just said that a second ago. So being baptized, chrismated, confessing, and communing Orthodox Christians, we become God-like by grace. We unite with God. We are no longer strangers, for we have become one with God. Everything in the church leads to theosis. The Holy Liturgy, the mysteries, divine worship, the gospel sermon, the fasting, all of these lead to this one thing, theosis. And the church alone is the place of theosis. The church is not a social, cultural, or historical organization. She does not resemble other organizations in the world. It is not like the different establishments of the world. The world has fine institutions, organizations, establishments, and other things, but our Orthodox Church is the unrepeatable sole place for communion with God, for the theosis of man. Only the Orthodox Church, not the Roman Catholic Church, not the Protestant confessions, not the Jehovah's Witnesses, not the Mormons, not the Seventh-day Adventists and the Scientologists. Only the Orthodox Church has the ability to deify man. Only within the Orthodox Church can man become godlike, nowhere else. No matter how much worldly institutions and systems progress, they can never replace the church. Do you see, brothers and sisters, how necessary it is to be in the church and to be an active participant in the church? This is why the Holy Fathers were so adamant about fighting against heresy, resisting heresy, false teachings, false worship, false religions, warning the flock to avoid heresy at all costs, because salvation exists only within the Orthodox Church. Salvation exists only within the Orthodox Church. In other words, theosis, sainthood. This is why the Orthodox Church does not recognize saints outside the Orthodox Church. We do not recognize the so-called saints of the Roman Catholic Confession. We do not recognize the sacraments of the Roman Catholics or the Protestants. We do not recognize sacraments outside the body of Christ. St. Paul said, one faith, one Lord, one baptism. All of those go together. You cannot have the sacraments outside the church. The sacraments are of the church. The church produces the sacraments. This is why the Orthodox Church teaches that we are to baptize converts, including Roman Catholics and Protestants. Now, unfortunately, there's a lot of false teachers out there and misconceptions about that topic. And unfortunately, in many places of the church, perhaps your own local parish, priests and bishops are not baptizing converts. They're not baptizing Catholics and Protestants. They're just chrismating them or receiving them by a confession of faith, which is even worse. Because they have this false idea that, oh, there's sacraments outside the church. There's saints outside the church. The Roman Catholic confession is a part of the body of Christ. Therefore, Roman Catholics are truly baptized. Protestants are truly baptized. Therefore, they don't need to be baptized again when they come to the Orthodox Church because they already were baptized. But The Orthodox Church does not actually teach that. The Holy Fathers do not teach that. The saints do not teach that. The consensus, how do you say, the consensus patrum, meaning the consensus of the Holy Fathers, does not teach that. The ecumenical councils do not teach that. The canons of the church do not teach that. If you want to learn more about this, I encourage you to go to Uncut Mountain Press and purchase the book titled On the Reception of the Heterodox, and you'll see the entire consensus of the Holy Fathers from day one up to our very own day, completely all lined out. And you see this consistent teaching from generation to generation to generation. There are no sacraments outside the church. The church is not divided because Christ is not divided. Even St. Paul says that in his writings. If Christ is one and undivided, then that means his church, the body of Christ, is also undivided and one. Cannot have the sacraments outside the church. So salvation exists solely within the Orthodox Church. Now, that does not mean that automatically, de facto, the non-Orthodox are all predestined to hell. That does not mean that. St. Paul says we do not judge those outside the church. We can say, on one hand, salvation exists solely in the Orthodox Church, and also at the same time and say, we don't know how God will judge those outside the church, right? That's up to him. That's his business. That's his prerogative. That's his purview, right? St. Paul even says that those who did not know Christ will be judged according to their conscience, and that's the criterion, is that those outside the church will be judged according to what they did know. They'll be judged according to their conscience. They'll be judged according to the opportunities that they had to know the church as best as they could, right? And we're also not challenging or questioning the sincerity of um, people's faith outside the church. That's, I'm sure there's many sincerely believing pious people outside the Orthodox Church, and I've met them in my life. I know people like this. But we cannot say that there are other churches outside the church, or that the church is divided and that Orthodox, Catholics, and Protestants all make up the church. Can't say that because the Holy Fathers don't teach that. Consensus of the Holy Fathers doesn't teach that. The scriptures don't even teach that. So on the one hand, we say salvation of the Orthodox Church. There is no salvation outside the church, but that does not mean, right? We can also say at the same time, that does not mean that the non-Orthodox are automatically de facto condemned to hell, right? God will decide that. He will decide, he will determine each person's eternal state, their eternal, um, judgment, right? God alone is judge. But that doesn't mean that we sit back and say, oh, it doesn't matter to not be part of the Orthodox Church, right? Christ gave us the church for a reason, right? Because Theosis is accomplished within the church, and that's what salvation is to become godlike by grace, deification. So we need to make these precise dogmatic statements nowadays, because this is unfortunately being challenged again and again and again, which is really tragic because it's unquestionable. If you actually sit down humbly and piously before the Holy Fathers and you actually take time to actually submit, right, obediently, humbly to the teachings of the Holy Fathers, you're going to see it's there, right? Our opinions ultimately do not matter at the end of the day, right? Because it's not our opinions that are going to get us to heaven, right? The truth is going to get us to heaven, right? When you follow the truth, you commune with the life. Christ says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. That's another reason why you can't have the sacraments outside of the church, or sainthood outside the church, because you cannot separate truth from life, right? In order to participate in the life of Christ, meaning communion with God, theosis, you also have to be following the way in and through being part of the true church, accepting, embracing the truth of the church, right? Dogma and ethos. So this is very important of a principle to have in mind. And if you want to learn more about that, if you want to go deeper, I recommend looking at Uncut Mountain Press's books. They've done a lot of research on this topic. I myself am part of this book press, and I've helped with this research even before being part of this publishing house. I also was doing immense research into this area of theology and ecclesiology. So we've published a lot of books in regards to that matter. And it's very clear, it's very obvious. I mean, it's, thank God, it's all been collected, compiled into these wonderful books, and there's really no excuse to not know it and to reject it, flat out reject it.